Today's video is sponsored by Squarespace. If you've never shot with a large format camera before, it can be a bit of an intimidating process, but the reality is it's not that difficult. It just takes practice, establishing a workflow, and an extra level of detail compared to working with other formats. So today in this video, I'm going to cover the basics of working with 4x5 film, essentially everything you need to know to be able to shoot your first few sheets. We're going to look at how a large format camera works, the necessary and essential pieces of gear that you'll need, and also how to prep and use them. And then we're going to jump out on location, going to expose a sheet of film, and I'm going to walk you through my process. And I think what's most important with large format is just to get out there and actually shoot some film and practice. And very quickly, you'll start to build up some confidence, figure out some more of the advanced features, but I think more importantly, actually understand what it is you need from a system like this. So I hope this video today gives you some inspiration to get out there and try out this larger format if it's something you've been wanting to do. So first up, why large format? Obviously this is a way of working that's not going to be for everyone. It's much, much slower, a very involved process, a lot of attention to detail, and then it's obviously a lot more expensive, especially nowadays with something like color film. But for me, there's really two things. So first, the size of the negative. There's a drastic difference between 4x5 and even something like 6x7 or 6x9 medium format. And that gives you a lot more options when it comes to scanning, the level of detail you can get out of your scans, obviously the resolution, the print sizes and things like that. But also with that larger negative, if you're using faster lenses, you can get a really unique look when it comes to shallow depth of field and compression. Really is one of a kind. But the second thing is just the control you have over your image using something like a view camera. We're not really going to dive into movements too much in this video today, but for me doing landscape style work, even just having something like front tilt where I can adjust my plane of focus and be able to get everything kind of near to far in focus, it just gives you a lot of flexibility when you're out working. So we're going to dive into a gear breakdown now, but before we do that, very quickly, just want to talk about how a 4x5 camera works if you're completely new to this. So it's pretty straightforward. Basically, you have your front standard here, and then you have your rear standard back here. And both of them are connected with the bellows to one another. On the rear standard, you have your ground glass here. That's what you look through to compose and to focus. Obviously, on the front standard, you have your lens here, and then your film holder slides in behind the ground glass when you're ready to shoot. You have your film plane there. So basically, when this is all zeroed out, you have your front standard with the lens, rear standard with the film. They're both parallel, and you would shoot your image. And to focus, you would rack your bellows out and back in. But what's unique with a camera like this is that both the rear standard and the front standard, so the lens and the film plane, you can move independently. So you can tilt, you could shift, you can swing, you can rise and fall. So you can do a number of different things for, say, creative effects, or to, say, adjust your plane of focus, to overcome problems, or perspective control. So it gives you like ultimate control over your images. Okay, so next up is just the essential items you would need to be able to go out and make an image on a 4x5 camera. I'll list them out here, and then we'll dive into each one in detail. Okay, so first up is obviously the camera itself. And then you're going to need a large format lens mounted to a lens board, a film holder, a cable release, a dark cloth, a focusing loop, and finally a changing bag or even a dark room would do. So first up, we'll talk about cameras, and really there's two different styles. So there's field cameras and there's monorails. And I'll say right now, probably a field camera is going to be the best choice if you're getting into this. The difference between the two is that field cameras like this Horseman right here, they're often a lot smaller, more compact. They fold up. They're meant to be, say, like traveled with or used outside, hiking and things like that. Whereas monorail is typically used in a studio more often. You can have the front rear standard connected by a large rail underneath. They're often quite a bit bigger, quite a bit heavier, but have a lot more flexibility when it comes to movements and things. But that's usually to the extreme. It really depends on what you need out of your system. So when it comes to field cameras, there's really two different styles. So there's clamshell or folding Usually clamshell cameras like this Horseman are going to be made out of metal or some sort of composite, and the folding cameras are going to be made out of wood. Obviously this varies nowadays though. It could be carbon fiber or 3D printed or a number of different options. But the clamshell style, what I like about these is that usually they're a little bit more compact. As you can see, they fold up into a little box here. What you do is you unlock the front bed, it drops down into place, and then you just pull out the front standard. Sometimes if you have the right lens as well, if it's small enough, you can leave it mounted when it's inside the camera. So these are really quick to set up, really easy. Everything kind of clicks into place and is zeroed out and is ready to go. Folding style cameras, on the other hand, like I said, often these are made out of wood. They're going to require a little bit more setup. Usually you have to raise the rear standard first and lock that in place, and then raise or mount the front standard and get everything zeroed out. How difficult this is or how refined it is going to depend on the camera that you purchase, but personally I have found the clamshell style to be a little bit easier and feel just a little bit more solid when everything's ready to go. That being said, clamshell cameras can be a bit more limited when it comes to movements, and this is all going to depend, of course, on the exact brand and model you get, so doing research is key. But I will say it does just take some time shooting 4x5 to get an exact understanding of what you need from a camera. For example, the Horseman that I shoot with is one of the most limited 4x5 cameras out there, but for the work I do, it suits me just fine, and the movements are all within range of what I need. Okay, so next up are lenses, and the nice thing with 4x5 is that there's all sorts of different options out there to choose from when it comes to lenses, and most of them are going to be really good quality and quite affordable. But the one thing that you do have to be careful of is that when you're shopping for a lens, you got to make sure you aren't buying one that was actually meant for medium format view camera, like 6x9 or say a 2x3 camera, because they are out there. They're going to look identical, and the problem is that they won't have enough coverage for the larger negative. So the way a 4x5 or a large format lens works is that it's going to have coverage that exceeds the size of a 4x5 negative, and that's obviously because you're going to be shifting and rising and falling and doing a bunch of movements. You need that extra room so you aren't running into like vignetting or quality loss issues. Obviously, if you don't have enough coverage, it's just not going to work. So a really easy way, if you find a lens online that you're interested in, just Google it. You'll find coverage specs on it right away. I think large format minimum you need is 160 millimeters, and most large format lenses I would say are going to have minimum 200 millimeters of coverage. But again, this all really depends on what you need out of it. So for example, I have this Fuji 105 5.6 lens. This is actually meant for a 6x9 camera, has 170 millimeters of coverage, and I use this all the time on 4x5 with a little bit of rise and a little bit of front tilt, and it still just has enough room to work fine. But when it comes to lenses, a good place to start is with a 135, 150, or 180 millimeter. Any one of those is kind of considered like a standard or normal focal length for 4x5. Which would be equivalent to say like anywhere from 45 to 60 millimeters field of view with a 35 millimeter camera. And usually these are going to be f5.6. Okay, so next up is a lens board. And obviously this looks pretty straightforward, but there's a couple things to keep in mind. So first off, not every camera is going to use the same size lens board. So when you buy a lens, it'll probably come mounted to a lens board already, but it might not fit your camera. For example, this Horseman right here uses a really small size lens board. I think it's 80 mil by 80 mil. It's really not that common. So in a case like this, you'd then have to go and buy a new set of lens boards, which is what I had to do. But also, when it comes to sizing, you're gonna need to get the appropriate size for your lens when it comes to shutter size. So with large format lenses, there's a number of different shutter sizes. So there's Copal 00, Copal 0, 1, 2, 3, some others. And basically the most common is going to be either Copal 0 or Copal 1, but as the focal length of your lens gets larger or the speed of it gets faster, that shutter size is going to increase. So this lens right here, this 155/6, uses a Copal 0, but this lens here, this 152 millimeter f3.5, which is quite fast for large format, uses a Copal 1. So you can see this is quite a bit bigger here. So those are just the two things that you have to keep in mind when you buy a lens board and when you buy a lens. But when it comes to mounting a lens to the actual lens board, super straightforward. So the rear grouping here on the lens, just on threads, basically splits in half. And then you have this retaining ring here, which you would thread on and just tighten with a spanner wrench. And then you simply just thread that rear lens grouping back on. So really straightforward and pretty easy to get up and running. Okay, so next up are film holders. And my recommendation, if you're just putting together your kit, either go and try and buy these used from another photographer where they're gonna work and they don't have issues, or if you can afford it, just go and buy new. That's my recommendation, just because it's peace of mind, especially when we're working with 4x5 film, which is really expensive. I hate, risking potentially ruining a sheet or having light leaks or other issues like that. But these are pretty straightforward. So every holder is gonna hold 2 sheets of film, 1 per side. You have these dark slides here. So you basically pull the dark slide out, you load in your film. I'll show you how to do this in a second here. Put your dark slides down, and then when you're out shooting, you put this in the camera, pull your dark slide, shoot, and put the dark slide back in. So really straightforward. Next up is some sort of dark cloth. So you can buy obviously photo specific ones like this one here. They come in different sizes. This is an absolute must, not specifically a dark cloth, but just something to go over your head when you're outside composing, because obviously you need to block stray light so you can focus on the ground glass. So you could use just like a blanket or a jacket or whatever you want. I bought this when I first started. I can't remember the specific brand. Oh, Harrison. These have been around for a while. I'll link to this one below, but this is a must-have as well. Some sort of thing to drape over your head when you're composing. Okay, so next up is a loop, not this specific one. The one that I use is, I think in my car, I can't find it right now. I believe this is for looking at negatives on a light table, but you want some sort of focusing loop. When you're out there, you have your composition dialed in. You would put this against the ground glass to be able to check critical focus. So I'll link to the one I have. It's pretty inexpensive plastic one. I think it's around 5 times magnification, but it served me well for the past few years. Okay, next up, obviously a cable release. So on these large format lenses, you can trip the shutter by hand. It's a little finicky, but I just would recommend using a cable release. That way your hand's off the camera and you're not risking any type of shake or moving anything. So even a cheaper one, this is one that I bought off Amazon as a backup, and it's a good thing because I lost the more expensive one I had. And this has been fine. The lock's a little finicky at times, but cable release is a must. Okay, and last up is a changing bag or a changing tent, or even a pitch black room can work if you need it. But basically you just need a place to be able to load your film holders and then unload them when you're done. I would recommend personally a changing tent if you can afford it. It's just nice to have that extra space and not have that bag kind of falling on top of your hands, especially at the start when you're trying to get used to the process. Back to the video in a second, just have to quickly talk about the sponsor today, which is Squarespace. As a photographer, a website is a really great way to showcase your work, but one of my favorite things is to use it to help experiment with new projects, and Squarespace makes it incredibly easy to do just that. They have really tasteful, clean templates to choose from that are also very intuitive and easy to use, which is important. And whenever I'm working on something new, I love that I can easily create a gallery page, drag images onto it to upload them, and then click and drag to reorganize. It's a really great way to sequence things and get a feel for how a body of work is coming together. And often I find I get a lot of inspiration from this. They also offer other great features like online shops, so you can sell prints of your work or books and other things like that. So check out squarespace.com today for your free trial, and when you're ready to launch, you can use my link below to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. Okay, so those are all the specific pieces of gear you would need. I'm gonna show you quickly how to load a film holder, and then we'll go out. Obviously, if you were doing this, you would want to be in a change bag, but of course, for the video, I'm just gonna show you here so you can see what we're doing. But with the film holder, again, 1 sheet per side. You'll see on this Toyo holder, the dark side itself has this middle gray side here, and then the other side is black. This will vary depending on the type that you buy. Some are white with black, but what I like to do is when I have an unexposed piece of film in there, I keep this gray side out. And then when I've exposed that in the field, I flip the dark slide So I have the black side out. So basically when it's black, I know that means no go, it's been exposed, that side's done. You could obviously choose the way you want to work with this, but the important thing is you just develop some sort of system so you know when the film's been exposed or when it hasn't. But the first thing I like to do when I go to load this film is just have both of my dark slides the proper way out, and then I put this in the change bag. And then when it comes to the film, so this is a sheet of 4x5 film, and the important thing is these notches up here. So this is called a notch code, and what this does is two things. So first, this identifies the film, type of film this is. That's obviously important. Say if you loaded up a film holder and you let it sit for like a month and you forgot what was in there, you'd be able to take this into a change bag, and just by feeling that notch code, you could tell what type of film this is. But the second thing is that's going to tell us which side the emulsion is on. So if you're holding this piece of film at yourself, when the notch is in the top right, that means the emulsion is facing you. And that's really important because obviously if you loaded this into a holder with the emulsion facing down, you wouldn't actually be able to expose anything because it would be backwards. So what I like to do is I take the holder into the bag, set it down in front of me, and I make sure the dark slides are on my right and the opening is here on the left, and then take the film, try and handle it by the edges so I'm not touching the emulsion, and I just start to feed it in just like that. And I make sure, again, that notch is in the top right, sliding in this way, that way the emulsion is out. And on the 4x5 holder, there's these two kind of guide rails on either side, and you basically slide the 4x5 film under that and keep doing it until you get to the end. I usually like to give it a little bit of a push to make sure it's butting against it. And then what I do is I take both my fingers and I grab either side and I pull up on the end like this. And I know that, if a side pops out or lifts up, that means it's not seated under the rail properly. But if I can pull up on both of them like this, I know both are under the rails and it's in there and ready to go. And then after that, just flip that down, push down the dark slide, and put on one of the locks. The more practice obviously you do, the easier this will get, but it is pretty simple off the start. A couple tries with this in the dark bag and you should have no problems loading it. Okay, so those are all the details. I'm gonna go and actually load an unexposed piece of film into this, probably Ilford FP4, and then we'll pack all this up and head out, and I'll walk you through the process. Okay, so on location, just a place close to my house here, come and do tests. Nothing terribly exciting, but it'll work fine for going through this process. So when you get out, first thing you want to do, obviously you want to mount your camera to your tripod, but then you want to go and you want to zero everything out like I talked about before. Again, with these clamshell cameras, this is a very straightforward process, but with the Horseman, what I'm going to do, drop down the front bed, and then I'm going to pull out the front standard. So I know right away with how this is designed that the back is going to be at 90 degrees and that the front standard is also going to be at 90 degrees. So quick to set up, but again, if you're using a folding camera, you just want to do the same thing. Get your back set up, make sure it's parallel with your front and that there's no movements with any of them. And then it is good practice just to go and check, say tilt, shift, rise. Again, make sure everything is at its zero position. So when you go to frame up your image for the first time, you don't have any tweaks to your plane of focus or anything. You want to approach the scene with everything zeroed out and then make your decisions from there. Also with your front standard, how far you have to mount it out is really going to just depend on the focal length of your lens. So wider lenses are going to be closer to the film plane, and longer lenses, you're going to have that front standard further out. So we're going to probably be okay right around there, and we'll mount the lens next. Okay, so the lens that we're going to mount today is this Topcor 150 5.6. And when you go to mount this to the camera, what I always like to do is make sure that this cable release and shutter are pointing up. And that way, when you mount it to the actual camera, you can mount your cable release now coming straight out. After that, you want to make sure that your aperture is wide open, and then large format lenses have this little switch here on the side that you want to flick open. What that's going to do is it's going to open the shutter so you can actually see through the lens, and then you obviously want it at its widest aperture when you're framing, just so you're going to have as bright of an image as possible on the ground glass. But camera's ready to go, zeroed out, lens is on, shutter's open. I'm going to go under the dark cloth now and frame this image up. Okay, so this is the view under the dark cloth, got the image framed up, and important to note as well, if you didn't know this about a view camera, but since there's no prism or mirror, you're looking straight through the lens, so the image is actually flipped upside down and reversed, which at first can be a little awkward when it comes to framing, but it definitely gets easier pretty quickly. Okay, so the scene is framed up here. As you can see, I've actually used some movement here. Like I said, I'm not going to go into too much detail about using movements in this video itself, but right here I've used quite a bit of front rise, kind of on purpose, just to talk about it quickly, but I have my tripod quite low, so what's nice is instead of having to tilt my camera up to get some more height in my frame, if I want to see more of these trees, I can just use front rise to shift that up, and then I'm not looking up, which can skew perspective and stuff like that. Anyways, composition is locked. Gonna go under the dark cloth now. I've done a rough focus, but this is the point where you would go. You would take your loop and you would just check critical focus. I'm gonna focus just on these, probably these trees about halfway into the frame, and then we'll go ahead and shoot this. Okay, happy with that. Once everything's locked in, you know, I have a composition that I like. I've done my critical focus. The next most important step that you always have to do is you have to close this shutter on your lens. And the reason you need to do that obviously is if you put in your film holder and you pull that dark slide and the shutter is just left open, you're going to expose your piece of film for a really long period of time and ruin it. So 100% always have to close this. Once you have everything locked, focus and composition, close the shutter, and then from there on out, the goal is not to touch anything because you're kind of working in the dark now. If you move your camera at all, or if you bump your focus or anything, you'd have to go back and open that up and get rid of your film holder and check everything again. Okay, so next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna put in the film holder, and what you do with this is these backs on view cameras are usually on springs like this, so you pull it out and you just slide the holder in. I like to give it a little bit of a pull afterwards. It has a lip on it, just to make sure it's seated in there properly, but the idea is that the film holder and the film itself is gonna be on the exact same plane that the ground glass was, obviously because you need it to be so your focus is correct. Okay, and the last thing I usually do is meter. This is a really good example of this. You know, the clouds were here when I set up, which is what I wanted. Now the sun's coming, there's a little patch of clouds left, so I always leave this till the end because basically I want to meter, set my aperture and shutter speed, and then shoot right away before anything changes. So I'm going to try and wait for these clouds to roll over the sun just a wee bit. I do know I'm going to shoot at f32 for this frame just to get everything in focus, so I'm going to set that right now on my lens. So f32, and then the last thing we'll need to do is we'll just need to set the shutter speed as soon as I figure out what that is. It's better. I think we'll roll with that. So we're going to go 1 second. So shutter speed and aperture are set, cock my shutter. The next thing I'm going to do is pull out my dark slide. I usually like to put a hand on the actual film holder here. Take that out. Flip the dark slide to the black side. Set my lock, and we're done. So that is my workflow for shooting 4x5. I hope this insight gives you like some confidence to get out and try this yourself. Like I said at the start, it can definitely be intimidating when you first begin, but very quickly, even just shooting once with a system like this, you'll start to build up confidence and get to a point where it is something that you can work quite quickly with. But developing a workflow, a number of steps, and just sticking to that all the time, and it's worth it. It's a unique way of working, and the results when you see the large negative are something that always will put a smile on your face. So anyways, hope you enjoyed this one. If you have any questions, let me know below. Other than that, thank you for watching. I'll see you soon.